Yesterday, a federal judge blocked the Pentagon from punishing Senator Mark Kelly, a retired Navy captain, astronaut, you know the story, for making a video that told members of the military they have a duty to refuse illegal orders. The judge, Richard Leon, ruled that Kelly's First Amendment rights had been violated and that the Defense Department had threatened the constitutional liberties of millions of military retirees. Fair enough. Who can argue with that? But then, at the end of his opinion, this is getting reported all over the place, he wrote that Pete Hegseth and the other proud boys at the Pentagon should more fully appreciate why the Founding Fathers made free speech the First Amendment in the Bill of Rights. Complete with an exclamation point. Read the opinion. It sounds great, and it sounds, in fact, like something you'd needlepoint on a throw pillow and sell at Colonial Williamsburg or Mount Vernon. And it's doing as much damage as that kind of garbage. Because the Founding Fathers didn't make free speech the First Amendment, folks. Hey, I'm Tad Sturmer, and I'm here with your bummer of resistance history lesson for today. The Federalists, Hamilton, Madison, the guys who wrote the Constitution, didn't want a Bill of Rights at all. Hamilton argued in Federalist 84 that listing rights was not just unnecessary, but it was dangerous. Madison called it a parchment barrier. They weren't protecting your speech. Even Jefferson, when he was writing to Madison about what to do with the Bill of Rights, didn't even mention speech. Press, yeah, but speech, nowhere to be seen. They were consolidating power in a new federal government, and they thought that structure was enough protection for whatever anybody else needed. The Bill of Rights exists because the Anti-Federalists, the people who oppose the Constitution, made up mostly of old revolutionaries who had begun the Revolutionary War, that was the issue. These aren't amendments because the founders wanted them. They're amendments because those founders were forced to concede them by the other guys after a long drawn-out fight over what the American Revolution was supposed to have meant. And when Madison was finally dragged to the House floor in 1789 to introduce what would become the Bill of Rights, freedom of speech wasn't first. It wasn't second. It wasn't third. It was tucked inside the fourth. And when they finally got sent to the states for ratification, it was third. The first two weren't ratified, so the Third Amendment then became the first. Freedom of speech is the First Amendment by accident, not by intent. No one sat in a room and said, "Oh, this one goes first because it matters most." That story is stupid. And a federal judge just placed the moral foundation of a constitutional ruling on it. Now, there is a kind of irony here that's thick, but I'll just note it and move on because it's almost too easy, and I'm not quite sure anybody else cares. The founders, virtually all of them, which is very tough to say about that group, would have been apoplectic, incandescent at the idea of an unelected judge overruling the civilian head of the military about how to discipline a retired officer, or about anything, really. Civilian control of the military was not an abstraction to those people. It was a thing. The judge invoked the founders to do something the founders would have found intolerable, and yet he reaches to them for justification of what he did. Whatever. We'll just leave that to the side. The real problem is what the little lie, the founders made it first, actually does. It makes that moment, the founding, the Constitution, the wisdom of the geniuses who wrote it, the only legitimate frame for every argument we're allowed to have. You want to defend free speech? Got to go through the founders. You want to challenge power? Find it in the Constitution. The founding becomes the North Star, something all these people are using these days. And political action that doesn't orient itself by it, that doesn't follow it to our salvation, isn't just wrong, it's un-American. And that's never been true. Not for a single moment in this country's history. The Bill of Rights wasn't a gift. It wasn't revelation from our revolutionary prophets. It was ripped from the hands of reluctant power grabbers by people who didn't trust them. The rights we have, the ones that actually function, the ones that protect people who aren't white, who aren't male, who don't have money, were never ever supposed to be there. They were forced into it and then fought over for centuries. So when a federal judge says the founders made free speech first, he erases all of that. He erases the resistance that made those rights real. He turns a contested, bloody, unfinished fight into a comfortable inheritance. And in doing so, he does what all nationalist history is designed to do. Makes the state the author of your freedom rather than the obstacle to it, and then makes you feel good about it. And that matters right now more than it has in maybe, 150 years. Because the argument this regime is making, that a sitting senator committed sedition by telling troops to follow the law, has a pedigree. The Federalists who wrote the Constitution and were forced to concede the Bill of Rights turned around and passed the Sedition Act of 1798, making it a crime to criticize the president. And that took a whole 8 years. The First Amendment didn't stop them, and that's what resistance is up against. Not a system that fails to protect rights, but a system that operates to deny them. So when a judge reaches back to the founding to protect speech, he's reaching for a weapon. It cuts both ways, and he either knows it and is being strategic, or he doesn't know it, and that's a whole different absurd problem. The founding doesn't settle the question of free speech. It sets it up. The amendment they didn't want to write didn't stop them from doing the thing it was supposed to prevent, and the courts didn't do a damn thing about it. That's not a contradiction. It's a choice, and they made that choice. And here's what makes it a little weirder. Probably a better word for it than weird, but I'm going to go with it. I don't think the judge needed the lie, did he? America has evolved painfully, incompletely, and always because someone resisted, to center free speech as fundamental to who we are. The evolution happened mostly in the 20th century, but it happened because people fought for it against a government that didn't want to give it to them. That's the real story, and it could have supported his ruling, I think. It's been a long time since it was in law school, but it makes sense to me. But I think that it would have cost him something rhetorically. It would have meant admitting that the rights he's defending weren't designed into the system. They were forced into it by people the system tried to crush. And a judge can't say that and still claim the authority of the founders. So why doesn't the judge tell that story? Why the myth? Well, because the lie does work that the truth can't. If the founders were unified and their intentions were clear, then the Constitution is a settled document with settled answers, and a judge who reads it correctly is just channeling the founders' will. It's a lot of authority for an unelected official. But if the founding was contested, if the rights we have were won by resistance against the very government the founders built, then the Constitution isn't a sacred text. It's just an instrument of power, and every right in it is there because someone forced it to limit that power. And that's a history no one with authority today wants to build on because their positions would be challenged. So nationalist history that makes the state the hero of its own story, needs the founding to be clean. It needs resistance to disappear. Every gain won by disruption gets folded back into the achievements of the people that opposed it. The abolition of slavery becomes the triumph of Abraham Lincoln, not of enslaved people who resisted for centuries and the radical Republicans who had their back. Women's suffrage becomes the wisdom of an evolving democracy, not the result of decades of disobedience. The civil rights movement becomes America fulfilling its promise, not Americans forcing their country just to do the right damn thing. And right now, that erasure is doing something specific and maybe dangerous. We're watching a regime that does not care about the Constitution, or at least the Constitution with the Bill of Rights in it. The first Constitution is perfectly fine with him. Hegseth has already said he's going to appeal, and if he loses, he'll ignore it or find another way around it, because that is what power does when it is not made to stop. And across from that regime sits an opposition that cannot bring itself to oppose, and it just wraps itself in the Constitution like it's a book of magic spells. If we just invoke the right amendment, if we just find the right judge, if we just say the founders with enough reverence, the system will protect us. Because the system was designed to protect us. Because the founders were wise and they put our most important rights first. It's living in a West Wing episode. Thinking that the words actually do stuff, and so what you really need is just a podium, not a backbone. That's the work the lie does. It tells the opposition to be patient, to trust the process, to let the institutions function as the founders intended. So be careful, be quiet. And it has never, not once in the history of this country, worked. Every right that means anything was fought for by the people who stopped waiting for the system and started making demands of it. The judge handed the opposition another incantation. What they need is a history that tells them the truth. The founders weren't protecting you. The system isn't going to save you. It never, ever has. Every right you have was won by people who understood that and acted anyway. That's resistance, the right of the people to alter or abolish a government that has become destructive of its ends. And it's the only thing that's ever worked. Be careful out there, folks. Alan Z.